Do you consider yourself loyal to any living princely pretender, in parentheses, other than the Pope? Who? My personal perplexity gives some context for the question. I revere the intelligent, educated Prince Jean d'Orleans, but does it make any sense for an American citizen living in Yonkers, born under the jurisdiction of Elizabeth II, to bind himself to the House of Orleans? Should I renew my former loyalty to the Windsors, who are both Protestant and usurpers? Should I be loyal to a Jacobite heir, Duke Franz, who, as far as I know, does not claim the Jacobite succession?
Very, very good question. Well, for myself, I have a tremendous affection for the House of Habsburg, not least because they are the bearers of the Western imperial tradition. I have a tremendous affection for the House of Bourbon, both not the Orléans, I'm sorry to say, but the legitimists, the Duc d'Anjou, Louis XX. Although, what he says about the Duc d'Orléans is quite true. He's all those things. And certainly better than any president France has had since de Gaulle. But similarly, I've got a certain affection for the Spanish Bourbons, and not least the Carlists, partly ideological, partly because I live in California, which they founded. And certainly I've got a lot of affection for the Jacobite heirs. But his question is a very, very good one. Especially, I mean, anybody living in Yonkers has problems just by living in Yonkers. You didn't need to hear that, and I didn't need to say it. A good friend of mine once complained. I was born in Manhattan, just so you know. A good friend of mine from Syracuse once complained when I said something about upstate, which he considered demeaning, and he said, "You people of the city, it's all upstate to you. It doesn't matter if it's Lake Champlain or Yonkers. Well, you know what? You guys are low down." So don't take any amusement I have at Yonkers' expense seriously. And actually, it's got a very noble name because it comes from Jonkheer, which is a Dutch noble title. Just so you know, it was owned by one originally. That's why it's called Yonkers. It was the Jonkheers. Anyway, but to answer your question more suitably, those are personal interests. In terms of the country as a whole, you've touched upon a big difficulty for the American monarchist, and that is that there is no single dynasty, a single monarchical tradition that encompasses the whole country. I'll take you a step further. You could have a certain loyalty to the Queen of the Netherlands, or the King of the Netherlands now, given that New York was founded by the Dutch, you see. Or if you were ethnic Russian or Iranian or Ethiopian, you have an ancestral monarch you could be attached to. But there is no single monarchical tradition for the whole nation. That is the problem I tackle in my book, Star Spangled Crown. Oh, I'm sorry, was that a plug? Oh, you always used to see this on the talk shows when I was a kid. They'd always, oh, I'm sorry, was that a plug? No, it wasn't a plug, thanks for sharing. Anyway, no, in Star Spangled Crown, I examine this very issue. Because while the history of this country, prior to 1776, north of Florida and east of the Mississippi, and as late as 1914 in the U.S. Virgin Islands, while our history is monarchical in its origins, there is not a single monarchical story that encompasses us all. And so the story of the book is the attempt of a latter Jacobite heir to construct one, not quite from whole cloth, but pulling in bits and pieces from here and there to try to create one, which, however, is not dissimilar to what the Founding Fathers did in the first place, when they cooked up the Republic. And I do mean they cooked it up. Well, I mean, they had nothing to, they took a little bit from here, a little bit from there, because they had no precedents, really, no complete mode to fit into. That's why all of our lesser governmental offices from the state level down all have royal origins, because it was a mix and match cut and paste kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in truth, is what the case would be for any American monarchy. So rather than a question of loyalty to a particular dynasty, although we can always hope that once the claims pass to the Liechtensteins, they'll become more conscious of it. Josef Enso for King of the United States. He's a little kid now, but you just wait. But we can become ever more aware of the monarchical origins of our own country, our own land, certainly of Yonkers. And I'm not being funny. Yonkers, I mean the manorial families that lived there were enormous, the Phillipses in particular. We can become much, much more aware of that than we are, number one. Number two, we can begin to develop a patriotism, a love of these United States that is not tied simply to the ideology of 1776 or 1789, and not merely to its institutions. We can begin to develop within ourselves a patriotism for the country itself, whose roots are definitely monarchical. And we can begin to think about the institution as it might or might not one day eventuate here. And then as far as personal loyalties based upon one's own family or one's own history, well, that's a matter of personal interest. But that's the thing. In my own case, I mean, because of my mixed descent, that gives me interest in about 3 or 4 different dynasties. I'm sure the same is true for most of us. But focus on the institution and on these United States above and beyond the Republican interlude.